Good morning. Today is the 8th of Nisan and the 30th of March. We are up to the 5th reading in Parshas Tzav. And I'll just read through it really quickly so that we get an idea of what it's about. In yesterday's, what we saw was that Moshe Rabbeinu began to inaugurate Aaron and his sons into the priesthood. And he did many things. He first of all dressed them, and then he anointed them. And in today's reading, we begin to hear, this is going to be in today's reading, it's in tomorrow's reading, he begins to do the rituals associated with their sacrifices. Now, until now, we didn't know what capacity Moses had. Was he just a wardrobe manager? What was he exactly? Because that's all he did in yesterday's reading. He only dressed them. But now in today's reading, he brought the sin offering bull in front of the tent of meeting, and Aaron and his sons leaned their hands forcefully upon the head of the sin offering bull. And Moses slaughtered it. And Moses took the blood, ascended the ramp of the altar, and placed some of the blood on the altar's four protrusions with his finger, and he walked around it and thus purified the altar. He then descended the ramp and poured the rest of the blood on the base of the altar, and thus sanctified the altar as an instrument upon which to effect atonement. So right away from the first two verses, we understand that he's not just managing this event. He is serving as a priest. And this is where we see it in today's reading, the fifth reading. What does it mean? How can he serve as a priest? Well, somebody had to officiate as a priest, because if Aaron and his children are now becoming the priests and they're bringing sacrifices to atone and to inaugurate themselves, so somebody has to officiate as a priest, and that was Moses. Now, when you think about it, how does the first person become inaugurated? How does the first person become ordained? How do you make the first, when a blacksmith wants to make tools, so he has to have metal tools with which to grip the iron that he's putting into the fire. If he doesn't have an iron tool to grip with, how's he going to make the next tool? But the question is, how did he make the first tool? Where did he get the first tool to begin with? This is called, in the language of the sages, it's in Birkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, it's called the concept of tzvat b'tzvat asuya, that you have to make a tool to make tools. And how do you make that first tool? How do you do that? So, in the physical sense, we understand how it's done. Sort of what you do is you use something that's not exactly a tool, and then you, with a lot of work, you fashion the first tool, and then you can make others. So you have to jumpstart from somewhere. You have to pull yourself up from your own bootstraps. But spiritually, how does that work? How do you make the first priest who can make other priests? How did Moses become the first priest, so he could inaugurate Aaron and his children? So that's the question that we're faced with today. And the answer is very interesting. The Talmud, in a number of places, including in Avodah Zarah 34a, it asks this question in a very interesting way. It says, what garment did Moses wear? Because the high priest wears 8 garments, a regular priest wears 4. So he's not a high priest, that's for sure. He's not being inaugurated as a high priest. He's serving as a priest. But so what did he wear? That's the way the Talmud asks this question. So what do you wear when you're somehow the initiating the first priest, and you're inaugurating the regular priest? So what's your title? Where do you come from? Who are you? So the Talmud answers a very interesting answer. It says he wore a simple white cloak. That's all he had. He had one garment. It was a simple white cloak, and according to some opinions, it had no hem, meaning it wasn't finished on the bottom. It was just sort of dangling. The threads were dangling off the edge. That's the answer that the Talmud gives in a number of places. But then we have to ask, so what does this mean? What do you mean you're wearing a simple white cloak? It's very interesting. The Zohar says that this simple white cloak is the same garment that the soul wears when it's in the Garden of Eden, in the spiritual Garden of Eden, not the physical. In other words, even when the soul is without a body, it still has some delicate garment which allows it to appreciate the divine presence. Well, what it's saying is that basically if there's no garment at all, and garment means that I'm enclosed in some forces that allow me to interact with my surroundings. So if the soul cannot at all interact, and it's only a part of God, so it also cannot feel the divine presence, because in the same way that a person can't feel themselves. The brain, right, our brain doesn't have any sense, it doesn't have any feeling nerves, and therefore the brain can't feel what's going on with the brain. It doesn't know. So when you do an open brain surgery, basically you don't need any anesthetic. The only anesthetic you need is for the rest of the body. If you're cutting through the skin here a little bit, but it's topical, you don't really need to do anything. Because if the soul in the same way is just a part of godliness, it can't appreciate godliness because it's just a part of it. So they say that even in the Garden of Eden, the soul has a delicate garment. This garment is called a chalukah de Rabbanan, the garment of the sages. Why they call it the garment of the sages, we won't get into right now. But the Zohar says this is the garment that Moses was wearing when he inaugurated Aaron and his sons to become priests. What does this symbolize? Even what the Zohar is telling us is still not clear. What are you saying to me? So if we look at the number of garments, we see that Moses wore a single garment. Aaron, who's the high priest, has 8 garments. 8 garments, 4 of which are gold and 4 of which are white. And a regular priest, his sons, have 4 garments. A hat, and a tunic, and pants, and a belt. And Aaron over that has 4 more. So there's 1, 8, and 4. What word do these numbers spell? So 1 is Aleph, and 8 is Chet, and Daled is 4. So it spells the word Echad. So this is the first thing to note, that the word Echad is being told to us here, sort of being coded into these garments. But we know that the meditation that even the Talmud tells us about when we say Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, when we say God is one, what we meditate on, what we think about, what we contemplate is the journey of the soul. The 1 symbolizes the soul as it was above. The 8 symbolizes the journey of the soul through the 7 firmaments down to the earth. So 7 plus 1. And 4 represents the spreading out of the soul over the space that it inhabits in this world. The 4 corners of the world, the 4 directions. The idea being that the Daled represents the mission that I have in my life, that the soul has in this lifetime. So when we go back to the 1, which is the garment that Moshe Rabbeinu wore, we're talking about the soul as it is before it came into this world. So what are we saying actually? We're saying that for Moses to be able to inaugurate his brother and his children as priests, Moshe himself had to rise up, he had to elevate himself back to the state of the soul before it comes into the body. That's the idea here. That when you want to initiate a new mode of spirituality into the world, you yourself, if you're the one who's initiating it, you yourself have to go above and beyond reality. You have to reconnect with the ephemeral state, the pristine state of the soul before it was in a body entirely. It's like you're connecting with your soul the way it was in the Garden of Eden. And by connecting up there, you can bring something new down into the world. So that was what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. And again, this is actually what every marriage is based on. How did I get suddenly to marriage? Because the whole idea of being able to live life with another person means that I always have to be seeking our connection above. I'll say it like this: if you hear anywhere on the internet advice about how to have a good marriage, all they ever say is, which are important things, but it all has to do with your relationship. What they don't say, which is the most important thing, is that your relationship really is secondary to the feeling that you both came from a single source, or at least you came from God's decree that you should be together. I just recently heard from a Jewish thinker a very simple idea. He said, if a man and woman are together and they're not married, my advice is separate. Why? Because you're not going to it's not going to be good together. Men don't go well with women. It's very, very difficult. Each one has their own mind. But if you're married, then you get the blessing from God. What does it mean you get the blessing from God? That God gives you the glue, the only type of glue that can really keep you together, which is called the divine presence between them. The divine presence between them is what brings them together. So again, the whole idea here is that every day that we're bringing something new into the world, we have to reconnect with the way that we were before we're in the world. It's like a person has to meditate on the Shema. What does it feel like to be without a body? What does it feel like for me to, and I can do this, I can strip myself of my entire existence. The only thing I need to believe in is in God, not in my own existence. If I can do that, and it's not very difficult, it's just nullifying myself and saying there's only God. If I can do that, then I have the power to initiate new things in the world. And God willing, we'll talk again tomorrow. And please